All right, everybody. I'm excited to introduce you to my next guest, the legendary comic book author, writer, editor, co-founder of Bongo Comics, former executive editor of Mad Magazine, and Eagle Scout. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Morrison. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
I was jealous about the Eagle Scout thing. I never made it myself. I
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
I made it so far, and then I was a Weeblo. I had all my Weeblo stuff, but never made it to Eagle Scout. My dad was an Eagle Scout, so I know it's a hard thing. So when I saw it on your list, you've got amazing accomplishments, but I wanted to throw that one in also.
well, my dad was my scoutmaster, and I don't think he took it easy on me, but it did make it kind of easier to get merit badges because, he was always kind of poking me, and he would say, I know this guy is a merit badge, he's a basket weaving merit badge counselor, and I could drive you over there right now if you want. So he didn't give me the hard sell, but he made it easy for me to get to various things and just to accomplish things that you have to
I
do to be an eagle.
I think where I fell apart was we were at one of these like overnight outings. I was with my dad, and they were doing this chant, and you had to figure out the chant. And when you figured out the chant, and the chant was "Awan Siam, Awan Siam," and for the life of me, I could not figure it out. I was the last kid, which is like being the last kid sitting there when no one's picking you for dodgeball, whatever. I
Yeah.
cannot figure out Awan Siam. I cannot. It's just not hitting me, and I think I had a breakdown from it, and I think that was the end of my Eagle Scout career. I think that's where it all ended for me.
We had the same chant. I remember that one. And looking back, it's kind of cruel. It's kind of a cruel thing to do, I think, to a kid. We actually did it to some adults, and that was fun.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was there,
but
there was no guilt there.
no, yeah, but I was just a little kid. I couldn't figure it out. Oh man. All right, I'm having flashbacks now, Bill. So let's move on to something else. You've done so many amazing things. One of those amazing things is working with the Simpsons and Matt Groening and Bongo Comics. But if we were to back up and then kind of move in that direction, like what's your origin story? What's the Bill Morrison origin story that got you to that meeting and the history with the Simpsons and drawing? I know there was Disney on the way to that path. So I'm
Yes.
just interested in what got you in. At what point in your life did you know I can draw and I can draw and I can make money and I can do this for a living?
I think the first time I knew I could draw was I was about 3 years old. I don't remember this, but my older sister was 11 years older than me. And she told me that she sat me down at the kitchen table one day and showed me how to draw a stick figure. She did a drawing, and then she said, I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. And while I'm gone, I want you to imitate what I did. So when she came back, I had drawn like this fully formed figure. So I didn't just draw a stick man. I gave everything a width, arms, legs. I put details on the head, hair, and ears, and everything. And she kind of flipped out, and she got very excited, and she said, "Oh my God, you're going to be an artist someday." She kind of fostered that over the years, and she was always showing me, "Here's how you draw a horse," and whatever I was into. Like if I was into monsters, she would do a drawing of the Wolf Man on big newsprint paper with crayons, and then she would tack that up in my bedroom on the wall. So she was always there, just kind of. It was I was kind of like a project for her because she saw that I had some ability and she wanted to foster that and make it grow. Most of my life growing up, I just assumed I would be an artist because that's what my sister said. And I didn't have any reason to doubt her, I mean, I believed what she told me. So I grew up in Lincoln Park, Michigan, south of Detroit. And so when I got into high school and started thinking about college, she also was there to help me sort of steer me towards what were the art colleges in Detroit. What were the possibilities? So Center for Creative Studies, which is now the College for Creative Studies, was one of the options, and that's where I ended up going. So I would say for like my first 2 years, I think, I really thought I was going to be a comic book artist. So everything I did, every assignment I got was sort of geared towards comic book art. But I grew up in the 70s, and I think I saw too many Martin Scorsese movies and too many 70s cop shows that were centered in New York. And back then, everything was in New York. Like if you wanted to be a comic book artist, that's where you had to go. I was afraid of New York. I was like, I don't want to, I'm okay visiting there, but I don't want to live there. So I started thinking about, well, what else could I do that I'm excited about that doesn't involve going to New York? And that's kind of an irrational fear when you grow up in Detroit, especially Detroit back then, because there was a lot of crime. I think Detroit is great today, but back then it was scary. I think especially for a kid, because you just heard a lot. All you heard was, oh, there's crime in Detroit. Even though I went to school there, where my school was almost like a little island, and if you ventured 2 or 3 blocks in either direction, you still saw the remnants from the riots in '67. So you still saw, like kind of burnt out buildings and vacant lots and all that. So it's weird that I was afraid to go to New York because of where I grew up. But I guess it's sort of like the thing you don't know is scarier than the thing you do know. I thought, well, what else can I do that doesn't involve going to New York? There weren't really many opportunities in Detroit at the time. So I ended up having a class with an illustrator named Gary Ciccarelli. And Gary is an airbrush artist and an amazing teacher as well as an amazing illustrator. He really hooked me, just turned me on to the sort of the West Coast airbrush look. And that's the kind of illustration style that was being done out in California for movie posters, for record album covers, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I ended up sort of gearing my portfolio toward, was that look. So I started shifting away from the comic book stuff. Got out of art school, worked in a really boring job for about 2 years, doing technical illustration. So just, sort of stuff for the auto industry. But while I was doing that, I was working on my portfolio. So evenings and weekends, I would go home and I would, just do things that I sort of thought would get me a job in California. Finally, the time came. I took a vacation, took a whole week, went out to California and just started showing my portfolio around. I ended up landing a job at a place that I guess you'd call it an ad agency, but it was sort of a boutique agency that catered specifically to the movie industry. So we did movie posters, we did TV guide ads, everything geared towards TV and motion pictures. And that was actually where I met Matt Groening, because it was prior to The Simpsons. He was a struggling cartoonist and writer, and one of the art directors that we had at the agency brought him in to write copy for movie posters. So I would see him around the office. If he had to come in and pitch ideas for movie poster copy, I would see him. The wife of the owner of the agency also had a greeting card company, and he also wrote greeting cards. So that was where I first met Matt. That was actually also the first collaboration that we had. Even though we didn't work directly together, one of his copy lines appeared on a poster for which I did the illustration.
Blood Diner.
It was Blood Diner. How did you know that? Oh my God, it's like you're psychic. Yeah, Blood Diner. And so I did the illustration, and Matt's copy line was, first they greet you, then they eat you.
That's a great tagline.
Something to that effect.
Was your illustration the hand with the knife over the Blood Diner, or the ghostly guy picking his teeth with a knife?
No, the ghostly guy came later. I think that might have been done for the video release.
Got it.
Yeah, but mine was the neon sign with the bloody knife. and the diner in the background, creepy looking diner in the background.
That's awesome. Okay, so your first interaction with Matt Groening has nothing to do with really comics or anything, but this is how you meet, which is
Right.
that's a great first meeting.
Yeah.
And do you guys
And
each have a copy of this poster in your offices somewhere?
I have one. It's not framed and hanging up. I seriously doubt that Matt has one. If he does, it's in one of his many storage units. Matt
Right.
actually, contractually, he gets a copy of every Simpsons and Futurama and now Disenchantment item that comes out.
So he
You
has
know that,
every piece of merchandise ever made for Disenchantment, Futurama, and
yeah,
The Simpsons.
yeah. Contractually, they have to send it over to his office once it comes out. What happens is there's a department at Fox. I think it's now called Consumer Products, but it used to be called Licensing and Merchandising. And they're the ones that whatever comes out, including Matt Groening. So, like, if you go to his office for a meeting, you'll see like these boxes of things, just toys and video games and
I personally have
T-shirts,
boxes and
everything.
boxes of the Simpson characters in my basement. When that series came out, I was an avid collector of that. Grabbed as many of them as I could. So does he have like a museum, or they're just all in boxes?
No, they're just, he just has storage units. The stuff that he likes to collect, like the things that he displays in his office, are just kind of the weird things. Oftentimes the bootlegs. Like he really loves the Mexican chalkware bootleg statues, of which there are many, especially back in the '90s, there were just tons and tons of bootleg chalkware statues. They're just like plaster figures that are usually molded off of another legitimate piece of merchandise, like a plastic doll or something, but then they would sort of trick them out. So they would put Bart in a sombrero with a serape, or they would do something different to it. And then they're almost always very badly spray painted. And they're really cool. I mean, for that reason, they just look very bootleggy and handmade and made quickly, to just kind of make a buck and then move on. But he
Uh,
he, he loved those. And when we had the earthquake back in 1994, he lost a lot of that stuff.
oh, that's unfortunate, but it's funny that he loves that kind of stuff. That's quirky fun. That's a good tidbit, Bill. Thank you.
I think it says something about him, that he's always been kind of a hippie and an underground kind of guy at heart, even though he recognizes the bootleggers are sort of taking money out of his pocket. He still kind of respects it, and because it's just something cool about it. I don't know.
Probably unique in the industry too. Most
Yeah,
people probably try and always sue. You had a very deep relationship with Matt in regards to Bongo Comics.
yeah.
How did that come about? Like, where did creating this amazing poster for Blood Diner, how did that then lead to this amazing collaboration with Matt?
Let's see. I left that agency after about 4 years, and I went to a studio that was run by one of my heroes, one of the guys whose work I sort of emulated when I was in art school. His name was David Willardson. He's done a lot of really famous images, but the one that people might recognize the most is if you have the album cover, the soundtrack album for American Graffiti
Mm-hmm.
for the George Lucas film. It's got the waitress on roller skates,
Sure. Yeah.
like a diner waitress. So that was Dave. So Dave painted that, and he had a studio, like just an illustration studio that did not only movie advertising and entertainment related stuff, but just product advertising and everything. So I went to work for him. I did a lot of sort of various types of paintings. One of the clients that came along kind of early in my tenure there was Disney, and I started doing all of their movie posters for the animated films. So I did the original Little Mermaid and Oliver and Company and like all the new ones that came out. But also back then, in addition to releasing the classics on video, they would also release them into theaters. So I got to do posters for Bambi and Peter Pan and Cinderella and a lot of the real kind of beloved favorites from my childhood. So I sort of got to be known as a cartoon illustrator. So when The Simpsons came along, the art director friend that I mentioned earlier, who was friends with Matt and who brought him in to write copy for movie posters, she was now working for him on The Simpsons as his liaison, kind of like his design and approvals liaison between him and Fox. So whenever there was, a piece of merchandise, she would do the approvals on it on his end. So there were people at Fox doing approvals, but like she would go into Fox a couple of days a week and she would look at merchandise and she'd say, yes, no, can't do that. Love that, but change this. So she was hardcore, like Matt's sort of right arm in terms of approvals for all the merchandise. So she called me up one day. I hadn't spoken to her in like maybe 3 years. And she said, I'm working with Matt on his new show, The Simpsons. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's on Fox. And it was early enough that you could actually say that and maybe even get a no answer. No, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's funny. He in the
Yeah,
context of having finished 32 seasons or something.
right. But back then it had been on for a couple of weeks and it was very new. And if you were talking to somebody about it, you weren't sure if they had seen it or knew about it. I told her, I said, yeah, well, I love it. I've seen it. It's great. And she said, well, I'm doing all of the approvals for Matt, and we're looking for artists to do merchandise arts. If you're available to freelance and do stuff on the side, love to have you come to my studio, and I'll show you how to draw the characters and etc. So I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I went and took a kind of a quick tutorial from her on how to draw the characters. She laid a bunch of model sheets on me. Next thing I know, I'm drawing Bart playing bongos and the Simpsons family in a kick line and all this stuff that ended up coming out on merchandise in 1990. And I did a ton of it for like about 6 months. I did so much that I sort of got a reputation at Fox. They liked what I was doing. I was fast. And so they made an offer for me to come on board full time, which I took. So from that point on, I was like all day long, I was doing artwork for Simpsons merchandise. And then I discovered that when Matt made his deal with Fox, he retained all the publishing rights. So his lawyer arranged for him to have the rights to do books, comic books, magazines, everything that fell under the publishing category. I was doing the merchandise during the day, and then at night and on weekends, I would work on Simpsons calendars or Simpsons books, or they started a magazine called Simpsons Illustrated, and I worked on that. That was where we started doing comics. So in the very first issue, I drew the first Simpsons comic strip, which was a Krusty the Clown comic that somebody had written. I'm not sure who wrote it. Possibly Steve Vance, because Steve was the editor. This was the first time I realized my dream of being a comic artist. It just kind of fell in my lap. It just sort of fell to me to draw this strip. And I had such a great time. And it was such a, like one of those moments of fulfilling a childhood dream that I called Steve and I said, hey, Steve, if you've got another comic script, I'd love to be considered to draw it for the second issue. And Steve said, well, we're really behind. Nobody's had time to write anything yet. If you want to write something, then you can also draw it, because Matt really wants to have comics in every issue. So this kind of solves the problem for us. Just, very calmly said, oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I'd love to do it. And I hung up the phone, and I had one of those moments where you sort of grab your head and go, holy crap, what did I just agree to? I've never written anything in my life. How do I do this? I don't know how to write a comic book script. So I just started thinking, what are some stories from when I was a kid that might be funny that I could turn into a Simpsons story? And that's what I did. I sort of thought of a story, and it was about me growing up, and I turned me into Bart, and I turned my dad into Homer. Obviously I had to change some things because my dad wasn't really anything like Homer, but it worked, and Matt liked it. And from that point on, I was not only drawing comics, but also writing them. And so we did that for about 2 years, the magazine, Simpsons Illustrated. And for the second year, we did an annual that we decided as kind of a gimmick. And because we were having so much fun doing the comics at this point, and by the way, the magazine was very eclectic. It was like a Simpsons fan magazine that had puzzle and game pages, and it had articles and all kinds of stuff. But it just had one little section that was comics, and it was very small at first. And then by the final issue, it was, I think we had about 12 pages of comics. But for this annual, we decided let's just actually do a comic book. So it'll be an annual issue of the magazine, but we won't call it Simpsons Illustrated. We'll call it Simpsons Comics and Stories, as sort of an homage to Disney comics and stories that we all grew up with. And we'll make it comic book size. It'll just be nothing but comics. And that's what we did. So that book came out. It sold like crazy. And that was what gave Matt the confidence to ask Steve and his wife Cindy, who was also working on the magazine, and myself, if we wanted to start a comic book company. And of course we did, because we were all comic book fans, loved comics growing up. And this was, to actually be in on the ground floor of a brand new company was amazing. So we did. We started Bongo Comics, and that was a gig that I had for about 25 years.
Well, I want to go backwards for 1 second. I want to go back to Disney. The Little Mermaid, right? That's the one that everyone talks about. That was your drawing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The one that Amazon stole the design for their rocket. That was based on your design, from what I recall.
Yeah, actually, I did the poster, and there was never any kind of uproar or controversy of any kind around the poster. But the following year, I did the illustration for the video cassette, and that's the one that everyone talks about.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you didn't do that on purpose then, right?
Of course not. No. No, it's funny because everybody, whenever I tell the true story, everyone is disappointed because they sort of want it to be that I did it on purpose. The urban legend is that the guy who did it was fired by Disney, and so this was kind of his last screw you gesture. And the truth is, I didn't work for Disney. I worked for this outside studio, so Disney couldn't fire me. I didn't work for them. But the story kept growing. Every time I heard it, and I heard it over the course of a couple of months, I overheard it several times, or I would hear it told to me by people who didn't know that I was the artist. And it was like a game of telephone where every time somebody tells it to somebody, the next person tells it to somebody else, and it gets more elaborate. So that funny game?
Yeah.
You play as kids. And so it was like that. And one of the early versions I heard was that the artist who did it, not just that he was fired, but the reason he was fired was because Disney found out he was gay, which seems weird today because, Disney wouldn't fire somebody. They wouldn't care if somebody was gay, much less fire them. But back then, that was a thing. That was a thing that could happen. That was not true. But the next version I heard was they found out not only was he gay, but he had AIDS. They fired him because of that. That was also not true. And then the final version I heard after all these versions was Disney fired this guy because he was gay, he had AIDS, and they caught him performing satanic rituals in the office after hours. So he was a gay Satan worshiper with AIDS.
This is so funny. It's so funny when you are talking to the real person about the urban legend.
Yeah.
You just realize how ridiculous urban legends are, and everyone believes them. Everyone loves to believe these insane, ridiculous things. It's so funny. It's so funny.
My wife was, she's an actor, and she was doing a show and was in the dressing room, and they were, it was a big cast. So there were some women that she wasn't really friends with, she kind of knew a little bit, not very well. And they were talking about this, they were like, one girl was telling the others about this degenerate Disney artist who put this phallic image in a children's video cassette cover. So my wife, Kara, is just kind of overhearing it. And she's getting kind of mad because, they're talking about her husband, even though they don't know it. And she finally decides to go over and just set them straight. So she walks over, says, "Excuse me, couldn't help but overhear what you were saying. And I just want to tell you that that's not true at all. My husband is actually the artist who painted that video cassette cover, and none of that is true." And she explained, the reason why it looks the way it does is because he had a really short deadline and he didn't have time to put in all these details that are on the tower and blah, 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 blah. And she gets to the end of her speech, and the woman looks at her, kind of takes a beat, and goes, "I don't think so." And then goes on, talking to her friends. But it so clearly illustrates, somebody comes over and gives you the real true story, and it's not as much fun as the story you were telling. So, nah, I don't think so.
People don't want the
I
truth.
reject that.
The truth is too boring. People
No.
want all the made up stuff. All right, so thank you for all that. I love that. So back to Bongo Comics. So you're doing The Simpsons, you're doing Futurama. You then also wrote the only non kind of Groening one, Roswell, which is your own personal um, limited series.
Yes. It wasn't
So
the only one, but it was the first one.
the first one. Okay.
Yeah.
So was that a hard pitch to get them to kind of deviate to like, I want to say, I guess it's all original material, but like non Matt Groening original material?
No, it wasn't a hard pitch at all, because the pitch really came from Matt himself. And it wasn't something I even thought about. He very early on, when we started Bongo, he said, we're going to do comics based on characters in The Simpsons. We're going to do Radioactive Man, Itchy and Scratchy, Bartman, etc. But he said, I would really love to see the company expand beyond that into other types of humor comics, and kind of the comics that we grew up reading as kids that don't exist anymore. And so he put it out there that if any of us had an idea for a comic book series that we wanted to do ourselves, and to bring it to him, if it sort of fit the model of what Bongo was, the kind of the comics that Matt wanted to produce, then we would do it. So I had that in my head for a couple of years, just always in the back of my head, thinking that's an amazing offer. It's a really generous offer, something that I shouldn't take lightly. Something, I shouldn't just take this for granted. I should really try to come up with something, because that's really cool of him to, offer to publish something
That is really
come
cool.
up
That
with.
is awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You don't get that every day. And so I was, like I said, for a couple of years, just thinking, what can I do? And one day I was reading a book on the Roswell UFO incident. There was like an eyewitness who says she saw an alien who survived the crash, like in the back of a truck, and they were taking it off to a military hospital. And that just kind of gave me the inspiration. And I thought, well, what if there was an alien that survived? And what would his life be like on Earth? And, what kind of people would he meet? And would he meet somebody that was sympathetic to trying to help him to get back to his home planet? And it just kind of went from there.
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
really
So
cool.
I pitched it to Matt, and Matt loved it. And so that was it.
It was different too. It was kind of 1940s style art. So did you enjoy kind of 90s humor at the time with kind of a retro feel to it?
Yeah, that's always sort of been my period, the 40s, 40s and 50s. I just like everything. Well, not everything, but I like visually. Um, I love the way cars look. I love the way buildings and signs look. I love the clothes, the hairstyles. I love the movies from that period. So I think early on, I thought, if I'm going to do a comic, um, that obviously I know how long it takes to draw a comic. It's hours and hours. So if I'm going to spend a lot of my life drawing something, I want to draw things that I like drawing. So, I intentionally set it in that time period for that reason, just so I could have fun drawing the kind of things I like.
That's awesome. And then the one kind of tidbit that I thought was fun was that you gave your character an engineering degree from the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I definitely wanted. It's funny when you're creating characters, and I know actors do this all the time, but up until this point, I was working with characters that already existed for the most part. I would look at what was on the show, and then I would write dialogue and I would write situations based on what I knew those characters would do, what I knew they sounded like, how they would talk. And they already had a backstory, all of them. So when I started doing Roswell, it was really fun to go, well, where's Julian Fries from? Well, I think she's probably from Michigan because I'm from Michigan. So I want her to, it's like write what you know about. So
Sure.
if I'm going to write this character and know about where she grew up, I kind of have to, it's kind of essential that I make her from here. And I knew I wanted her to be brilliant. So I remember, like actually looking up where can you get a degree in engineering in Michigan. I wanted to make sure that somebody wasn't going to write a letter and go, well, that's really stupid. You can only get a engineering degree in Michigan from Eastern. You can't get it from U of L.
That would have been a
I
stretch to
didn't
like
think that
say
was going to
Eastern
happen.
Michigan.
But
I went to Eastern, but like even I would know that.
yeah, I mean, I didn't think that was going to happen, but it's funny. It's like when you're writing, especially when you're writing comics, because comic book fans can be very particular about continuity and facts and, annoying things like facts. So I'll write something sometimes and I'll think, oh, that's okay. I don't have to look that up. I'm sure everyone will be fine with that. But then there's like that voice in the back of your head that's like, better look it up because some fans gonna read this and go, "Excuse me, sir, but they did not have." Uh,
That's funny. Yeah, I can see that. You made the right call. Why was it only 6 issues? Was it always meant to be kind of a limited
no, it
run?
was meant to be ongoing, but a little thing called Futurama came along,
Mm.
and I started helping Matt develop the character designs for Futurama um, while I was doing Roswell. And that wasn't a problem. I had plenty of time for that. But once the show was up and running, I ended up becoming the art director on the show, in addition to um, my regular job as creative director at Bongo. So I had those two things that I'm juggling at the same time, and trying to get out an issue of Roswell every month or even every 2 months just wasn't possible with those other two very time consuming jobs. So I just had to give it up. I
Yeah, it
just
sounds
couldn't,
it
couldn't do all three.
sounds like a rough life, Bill. You got a dream job that gets interrupted by a different dream job.
Yeah.
I mean, let me play a
Yeah.
little violin for you.
I know. I know. It's hard. It's really hard to get any sympathy around here.
So you went from the 40s and then you just jumped right to the future. So that's kind of a flip there. That's kind of cool though. All right, so
Yeah. Although there was an episode of Futurama that we did where they actually go back to the Roswell UFO crash, and it turns out it was Bender. Well, it was the Planet Express crew that actually crashed, and then Bender was part of the debris that they took from the debris field and examined. Um, and I got to design some of the characters for that as art director. And one of the characters I designed was kind of an homage to Julian Fries from Roswell, from my Roswell series. She's a diner waitress who's Fry's grandmother, who he ends up having sex with and is possibly his own grandfather. one of the most one
Yeah,
of the most
live in the worst.
horrifying plot
Yeah.
points in the history of animated television.
Oh man, you guys probably just sit around going, "This would be hilarious." This pulling these dots,
Well,
connecting these dots.
the writers did. Every so often, I got to, you know, visit the writers' room. So yeah, there was a lot of that going on.
That
But
is really funny.
mostly, as you know, those of us just doing designs, we would go to the table read and you know, just generally laugh ourselves silly for 45 minutes and then go off and draw all the stuff that they wrote.
Are you still doing any work with The Simpsons now? Do you still work with Matt?
Yeah,
Show?
occasionally I just did a job that was kind of like an internal um, job that one of the producers asked me to do, but I did I did some stuff for when The Simpsons became part of Disney, and they were sort of premiering the where they were kind of announcing the fact that the Simpsons was going to be on Disney Plus, and that they were now part of the Disney family. So I did some pieces for that. It was for a convention they have in Anaheim every year called D23.
Sure,
So it's
sure.
like, so, you know, the Disney fan convention. So I did some things for that. I did a poster for the Thanksgiving of Terror, or Thanksgiving of Horror episode.
Halloween of Horror, or did they do a Thanksgiving one?
They did a Thanksgiving one,
Oh.
I think in 2019. So it was basically the same as the Treehouse of Horror Halloween special, except that it was Thanksgiving themed vignettes.
Oh,
So it
funny,
had like
funny.
three Thanksgiving stories
Do you
that were
know?
all
Do you know?
very
Do you
bloody.
know Al Jean?
Yeah,
Okay, I talked to him on the podcast. Also, he's from Michigan too.
I know. Yeah.
We grew up in. He's actually from the same exact city that I grew up in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all that. So let's talk about for a second the Simpsons Yellow album. First, I want to ask. I want. I want to understand the whole art appropriation and KAWS
Oh,
and all that
mhm.
kind of stuff. But first, I want to understand. So this is a album cover that you designed and patterned it after the Sergeant Pepper album. My question is, you drew it, right? So
Yes.
why was Matt Groening's name on it? Is that was that?
Oh, that's except for the comics,
Mhm.
that's standard on everything. It's just a contractual thing. So when Matt made his deal with Fox, in addition to his lawyer securing the publishing rights, she also put in a stipulation that anytime Simpsons characters appear in print, whether it's, you know, on any kind of merchandise or magazines or whatever, it has to have Matt Groening's signature. And that was a way of preventing Fox from distancing themselves from Matt, or distancing Matt from his creation more correctly, which could easily happen. You know, I mean, he was hired on. I mean, he created the characters, he co-developed the show. He's been on board as a producer, executive producer from the beginning. But, you know, at some point, if he was separated from the show, they could very easily just sort of pretend like he didn't create the characters, just not acknowledge it. You know, it would be very difficult for him to make the claim that he, you know, he did create it. So this was sort of a way of making sure that never happened. So it's, you know, it's something that I applaud. You know, I think if I created something that was as big as The Simpsons, I would want my name on it. Cool thing that Matt did, the thing that he has more control over than anything, is the stuff we did at Bongo. All the books, all the publishing. He allowed us to have our names on the covers as well as in the credits of the comics. And so those are really the only places where you will, not really the only, like if you get the Simpsons Yellow album and look at the indicia on the inside, it probably says who actually drew it, but it wouldn't say it on the cover. On the cover, it's just Matt's name, and I think that's fine. I think it's I would never want to see Matt separated from his characters, so I think that's good. I know that was kind of a long-winded way of
No, that
answering
was
that question.
interesting because I always wondered that because as I was reading and you start to see the art of Bill Morrison art, and then it's like, oh, but it doesn't have your signature. It has Matt Groening's signature. I always was curious about that. It was so that was no, that was a good answer. I
Yeah,
appreciate you
most of
sharing
the
that
stuff that
insight.
you see, most of the stuff that you see is drawn by me or somebody else. There are a few pieces of merchandise that Matt did draw. He drew the U.S. postage stamps. Those are his.
Okay,
I know there's like a few things that have that perfect Matt Groening touch, but most of it he just there's just no way. It's like Peanuts. There's no way Charles Schultz drew all the Peanut stuff that you see out there.
right,
He had ghosts who did it, and then Schultz's name is on it. So that's pretty common.
very cool. So in terms of the so you drew the Simpsons Yellow album. It's based on the Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, like I mentioned before, and then KAWS is commissioned to do a version. KAWS is the artist that puts the X's over the eyes and kind of changes
Right.
the characters for every. And so his version, that they were, the Kimpsons and all that, that sells for almost $15 million. It's at the big auction. That's
Yeah, I heard about that.
I heard that you heard about that. What are your feelings on that?
Well, it's funny. I think it seems like people who know me and Simpsons fans in general were more outraged about it than I was. I think the first comment I made about it publicly was that it put me in the same club with some of my heroes who were artists that worked like in the 50s and 60s, and their art was appropriated by people like Roy Lichtenstein and some of the pop artists from that period who just took these comic panels and then sort of blew them up, repainted them, and then signed their names to them without any acknowledgement of the original artist. In a way, it was kind of a badge of honor because the thing that was, done to those guys, which I don't think was right, was now being done to me. So that was sort of my way of looking at it. I never felt like I was damaged because I don't own that art. I don't own the rights to that artwork. It's owned by Fox and now owned by Disney. So it's not like I could sue KAWS for just tracing over my art and altering it slightly. I think my attitude more than anything, aside from the badge of honor thing, was I was just kind of mystified by it because I just didn't understand. I mean, I understand somebody doing it. I understand somebody taking a piece of artwork, altering it slightly, putting their name on it. People do it all the time, but it's not all that often that something like that sells for $15 million. And that's kind of the
right.
thing that amazed me is like, how does somebody pay that much money for something that is basically a tracing of a piece of merchandise art? That just seems bizarre to me.
Yeah, it's crazy what people will pay for. It's for the record, I like your version better.
Well, thank you. I mean,
I mean, KAWS, I guess is cool. I mean, I've seen it. There's a big KAWS in downtown Detroit, actually, outside the Quicken Loans building. There's a Mickey Mouse
yeah,
one. I just don't get it. I don't. It seems like more depressing than.
I got nothing. I mean, I got
I got
nothing
nothing.
against
Yeah,
him as an artist. I think I really like the stuff that he does that's more original. And like when his clown figure with sort of the Mickey Mouse pants and the gloves, I think that's sort of a step removed from what he did with the Simpsons images because he's sort of creating his own character, but he's making a statement by putting him in the pants and the gloves and the giant Mickey Mouse shoes. He's not really just doing a drawing of Mickey Mouse and putting X's on his eyes. There's more originality to it, and I really like that stuff. I think that stuff is a lot more fun than just taking a piece of art, tracing it, and doing minor alterations.
well, let's get one of your pictures on eBay, and then we'll put a link to it and try and get you $15 million for your stuff. Somebody will do
Thank you. I wouldn't say no to that,
it. Just take one of your own drawings, just put an X over their eyes and see what we can do here. Make a trace his drawing of your drawing.
Then, a couple of people have suggested that I take that art and then do like further slight alterations to it and put it out there and see how much money I can get. Or see if I get a cease and desist letter from his lawyer.
That would be funny, right?
It's interesting. It reminds me of when I was working back at Fox Licensing and Merchandising. Somebody there had the idea, like it had been a few years since the early Simpsons mania, which is what generated a lot of the bootleg Simpsons images, because there were a lot of bootleg T-shirts, other things, but mostly T-shirts. And somebody at Fox Licensing said, what if we did a line of T-shirts that were based on the bootlegs? I thought that was a fun idea, but one of the lawyers there shot it down because they said, well, then, if we just copy exactly the bootleggers' art, even though it's based on our art, then they could sue us for appropriating their stuff. And that made me laugh out loud, because I just thought, that's crazy. It's like, we do a piece of art, somebody rips it off to make Bart Sanchez or Rasta Bart or whatever, was hot back then. And then we take that and put it on a shirt and make, thousands of dollars. They could sue us for that.
Yeah, the world we live in, it's a crazy place.
The irony is that now those bootleg shirts are selling for hundreds of bucks. The people who collect Simpsons merchandise love those, and they're like highly sought after.
I worked for a major corporation that will remain unnamed, and they would do fan art of our mascot, and the lawyer would never let me acknowledge it, ever. Because he's like, if you start to acknowledge it, you're encouraging it. And then if you encourage it, then we have to potentially fight our IP, and then we encouraged it. So, it creates this whole weird cycle.
That's why every time somebody did an interview with Matt and did a shot of his studio and saw those knockoff Mexican statues, that people at Fox hated that, because that was basically Matt giving the seal of approval to the bootlegs.
Right.
Even if he didn't say it in the interview, it was kind of there in the photo.
Let's pivot for a second to another amazing thing that you did, Beatles Yellow Submarine. You did the graphic novel adaptation of Yellow Submarine. That must have been a hoot, because that art is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fab. It was gear. It was groovy. I don't know. Again, it's like, I grew up with the Beatles. I think Beatles music was playing in our house almost constantly when I was growing up. I didn't see the film. I didn't see Yellow Submarine when it came out, but I remember seeing it the first time it was on television and just being, mesmerized by it. So yes, when they asked me to not only draw that, but also write it and adapt it, I don't know. I'm still kind of pinching myself, because it's one thing to work on characters that are super iconic, like The Simpsons. When you're an adult and they're sort of fresh characters, you don't have that nostalgic connection to them. So as much as I love The Simpsons and Futurama and Disenchantment and love drawing those characters for fans, the fact that I got to draw Mickey Mouse officially for, to advertise a Disney film, the fact that I got to draw Bambi and Peter Pan and then the Beatles, it's like a different level of giddiness, because not only are they world famous and everybody recognizes those characters and loves them, but I personally have that childhood connection that makes me go, man, if you could go back in time and tell your 11-year-old self that you did this, his little head would explode.
So in the art world, is it considered the highest of honor to be trusted with a character like that? Like, all right, Bill, we're going to let you, your hand, your pencil, you're going to draw Mickey Mouse for Prince and the Pauper. You're going to do all this. You're going to draw Bambi. You're going to create this image that that people are already familiar with, but it's now going to be through you.
I don't know if it's recognized by most people as just being an incredible honor or just to be trusted with those characters. I think for artists personally it is. I mean, I definitely feel that way, and I think a lot of artists probably do. I think the people who are entrusting the artists with those characters, I don't think it's something they think about, because I know, I mean, I've been on the other side of that where I'm hiring an artist to draw the Simpsons, for example.
Okay.
And all I'm really thinking about is I want to make sure they do it correctly. I want to make sure they don't do anything that's going to get me in trouble later from the people higher up above me. I don't, I was never thinking in terms of like I'm honoring somebody with this job. I think I'm more just, like you find the people that you trust and they're going to do a great job, and you're just excited to see what they come up with.
Awesome. And then how did you end up at Mad Magazine? Mad Magazine, just so you know, when I grew up, I collected Mad Magazine. I had subscriptions to Mad Magazine. At one point, I don't know to this day why my parents allowed this, but they did. I would cut out all the comics, the little strips from Mad Magazine and all that, and I literally everything from Mad Magazine and wallpapered my entire room with Mad
Wow.
Magazine. I'm upset because I don't even have a picture of it. I have nothing,
Oh,
nothing to
that's
show for it.
fantastic.
It was back then, before phones had cameras and
Yeah, I know.
before phones.
I
So
remember those days when you're like, I got 2 photos left.
I know, right. Yeah,
Must
yeah. You had like the
must
actual
use them
35 millimeter
wisely.
film. Yeah. So how did you then move on to this dream job of Mad Magazine?
So I'm at Bongo. I've been editing the comic books for years. And I got a little bit bored with it because I was spending all my time overseeing other artists and writers, but I didn't have time to write and draw on my own. So I was sort of missing the creative part of what I like to do. And I kind of felt like I was grading test papers all the time. Like I'm just getting scripts and I'm marking them up with notes, and I'm getting layouts, pencil drawings, and I'm marking them up and making corrections and changes. And it just wasn't that fulfilling because I just wanted to draw more and I wanted to write more. So I went to Matt Groening's lawyer, who's also his business manager. Just told her kind of how I was feeling. And I had sort of caught wind that Matt was working on a new show idea, but I didn't know what it was. I said, I'm just wondering if maybe I should step away from the comics. I feel like I'm kind of phoning in the editing. Maybe I should step away and do something else if that's possible. And she said, well, yeah, actually, Matt is working on a new show, and it would be great if you could help him out with that. Also, in the meantime, she said, we want to develop these comic reader apps so that people can read Bongo Comics on their phones and on their iPads, etc. And we need somebody to creatively oversee that. So that's what I did. I ended up stepping away from my job as creative director. And while I was sort of waiting for Matt to figure out what he wanted to do with the new show, I started developing these apps, and I did a Simpsons one, and then one for Futurama. So that took a couple of years. By the time I was finished doing that, Matt was sort of, getting things together in terms of disenchantment. And so I was brought in to work on character designs. There was a little period where I was kind of doing both, working on the apps and working on designs for Disenchantment. Next thing I knew, he had pitched it to Netflix, and Netflix bought it, and they're putting together a production team. And so now I'm on that team full time, and I'm doing Disenchantment. And that was fine until I got a call from the lawyer, and she said, because Netflix is now taking over, they're going to be paying your salary. So there's going to be some slight adjustments. They're going to have to shave your salary slightly. And I was like, what do you mean shave my salary? What does that mean? And she said, well, it's in the agreement, look it over. If you have any questions, give us a call back. I get the agreement, I look it over, checked out the new salary, and it was about a 35% pay cut from what I was
Ouch.
making. Yeah. That was, it was kind of like a big kick upside the head. I talked to my wife and I said, can we afford to do this? She said, no, we're still paying a mortgage and we've got 2 car payments plus insurance, plus this, plus that. So I went back and I said, look, I don't think I can do this. I can't make this work. The only way I could is if I'm allowed to do freelance on the side, and the agreement says I'm not. And so she went back to Netflix, came back to me and said, okay, Netflix is going to send you a new agreement. It says that you're allowed to do freelance. It just can't compete with anything Netflix is doing. So I couldn't do freelance on like another animated show, but I could do freelance for a comic book company. So I thought, okay, great. I started putting feelers out just for freelance work. And one of the first people I contacted was Dan DiDio at DC Comics. I had already, I'd done another job for him a few years prior. And I said, hey, just letting you know, my situation with Matt Groening's changed a little bit. If you've got any freelance work, I'd love to be considered. And then just kind of on a whim, I added, by the way, if you have anything more permanent, I'd be interested in hearing about it, because I just started thinking, maybe I should look elsewhere for something that pays the salary that I need, that doesn't force me to have to do freelance work on the side. I got a response back immediately from Dan, and he said, I think we should have lunch because I've got an opportunity that might be beneficial to both of us. That was exciting, but I didn't really know what it meant. I'm known for doing humor, so I didn't think they were going to hand me Batman, let me edit Batman or be like the regular writer or artist or anything like that. So I thought, well, it's Warner Brothers, maybe Bugs Bunny. Maybe they're going to ask me if I can edit the Looney Tunes comics or whatever. So
That would have been cool.
that would have been cool too. And so I was excited to go have this meeting. We get to lunch and he starts telling me about, how DC has moved to California over the past few years so that they could be closer to Warner Brothers. And this is an edict from Warner Brothers, from the parent company. He said the only holdout is the guys at Mad Magazine, who dug in and said, we're not moving. And so I guess there was a lot of back and forth. The DC people and the Warner Brothers people said, no, you have to move. We want the whole company out in California. And the guys at Mad said, well, no, we're New Yorkers and Mad's a New York magazine and we're staying here. So finally they said, all right, look, we'll let you stay here. We'll put you up in an office, but just so you know, we're going to have to find somebody to take over the magazine out in California. For the time being, business as usual, but we will have to look for somebody. When I contacted Dan and said I'd be looking for something more permanent, he told me, he said, I just assumed that you were sort of joined at the hip with Matt Groening, and I figured you would always be working on whatever his projects are. Didn't imagine that you'd ever be a free agent. So he said, when you said that, I thought Bill would be great for taking over Mad Magazine. I'm listening to this at lunch, and again, my inner 11-year-old is going crazy because I'm just thinking, oh my God, he's in the lead up to it. I'm like, is he about to offer me the job of editor of Mad Magazine? No, that's not possible. Are you kidding me? That could never happen. Wait, I think he is. Yes, he is. Oh my God. So having this little inner monologue and, your head's exploding, but you're trying to be cool and, businesslike and
That's so cool.
But yeah, so that's how it happened. It wasn't anything that I lobbied for or even knew that was possible. Just the happenstance of me saying, oh, by the way, I'd be interested in something more permanent was what did it.
You have hopped from dream job to dream job. What are you doing nowadays?
Well, my wife and I moved back to Michigan. We bought a house that we think is about 112 years old. No, 108 years old. We're kind of rehabbing the house, bringing it back to life. I'm a freelance artist now, freelance artist and writer. I'm just enjoying the freedom of that alongside the terror of not having a regular paycheck every 2 weeks. But it's great. We're loving it. It's we love being back in Detroit.
That's awesome. Where can people keep up with you on the social medias?
I'm on Facebook, under my own name, but also I have a like more of a page related to my art, which is Bill Morrison Atomic Battery Studios. Instagram is at Atomic Battery, which is my studio name, Atomic Battery Studios. And I'm doing a lot of conventions. Another Beatles book.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me and sharing a bunch of your stories with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. My pleasure. God knows I got stories.